Wonderful. So it is the top of the hour, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us for our webinars today. This is our third presentation of the day. Today, my name is Shayla, and today and every day, my name is Shayla. I'm the Garden Program Coordinator at Green Venture. I'm joined by Steve. He's our youth volunteer who will be monitoring the chat. We have a few housekeeping items for those that might be new to Zoom and might be just joining in. Mics are turned off just to ensure the quality of sound for our recording and that we have good sound for today's session. Our session is going to be recorded and it will be available for you at a later date. Throughout the session, we encourage you to use the chat box for any questions to be answered at the end of the presentation. And if for some reason we get disconnected today, you will be placed in the waiting room and we'll be right back as soon as we can. As a reminder, if you are joining us for multiple sessions today, you will need to log on to the individual Zoom links that were sent out in the email. Today, we're joined by Steph Roth. Steph is the owner of Silver Creek Nursery, where they grow and sell over 200 varieties of food-bearing plants and trees, and maintain over 500 varieties of apple, pear, plum, peach, cherry, berries, and more in their permaculture style test orchards. They grow with only organic inputs and have not used prohibited substances to organic standards since 2016. They pasture meat birds as well in the rotational cover crop fields, which are available for sale at the nursery. Silver Creek acknowledges they are living on and farming on Attawandrang territory, the New Charles and or Haudenosaunee, Six Nations or Arikris territory, and quote, "We find arrowheads and flint in the soil to remind us." I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and Steph, I'm going to leave it to you to take it away.
Sounds good. I'll just get that going. Okie dokie. Oops, that's not what I want. Slideshow. Oh, sorry, hang on. This is the farther on in here. There we go. So hopefully everybody can see that and hopefully everybody can hear. If anybody does have any hearing problems, post in the chat and I'll try and speak up. I know my speaker on my laptop is the best. So first things here, I'm hoping I can help you figure out how to choose a fruit tree. So the main considerations, the first thing you want to do is plant something that you are excited to grow, and think about what you want for your tree in the future. So maybe you want to, have fresh eating apples, or maybe you want to can peaches, or maybe you want to make cider or perry, whatever that may be. That's kind of your first eliminating factor, figuring out what you want to plant. From there, you're going to want to kind of go through these other sort of features here. And these other features, they all interconnect. So from the microclimate that you have, and that kind of, we'll go into this in more details in a couple slides in, but that kind of goes over soil type, fertility, drainage, sun, natural shelter or fence lines and things like that, and your hardiness zone. And part of the screen, oh, there we go, I can drag this little box of faces here, hardiness zone, etc. So then how much space do you have? That's of course another consideration when you're trying to figure out what to grow, and considering pollination in that little spot as well. You also want to consider what your management techniques are going to be, whether you're going to go conventional, organic. Do you have a tolerance to blemishes or worms with the fruit, and what your feelings are that way is another good thing to be realistic about when you're planning to plant a fruit tree. Your rootstock and your years to bearing, those are quite closely related, and they also relate into the other things. Rootstock, again, we'll go into that more in a couple more slides in, and you'll see how they all cross connect. So we'll just jump right in here. First thing before we get to anything else, though, we'll talk about potted versus bare root trees. So here on the right hand, that's bare root. The left is potted trees. If possible, always go with bare root. You're gonna have a healthier root system, and potted trees look great because you can see the leaves, and of course then you're reassured that they're growing and they're doing their thing. But they do, trees are not naturally, they don't like to be in pots or in containers. And when they do that, the roots spiral a little bit in the pots often, and you can trim the roots when you plant, and that definitely helps. But with fruit trees, they tend to have less stress, and you can just go with the bare root option. It also makes it be like the bare root trees. They're in our fields, which is behind Jade here. And they're grown out there in the fall. We dig them, they're in cold storage, and they go directly to you. So it's the same thing if you're trying to move a small child. If you move them when they're sleeping and they stay sleeping, it's great. If you try and move them when they're fully awake and fighting, it'll just be more stressful. So always go bare root when possible. So then this goes back to that first point again. You got to get passionate about whatever you're growing. So don't, grow what you want to grow. Don't grow what you won't use. There's no point. You'll end up losing hope potentially, or not losing hope, I guess, but you just want to make sure that you're passionate about what you're doing. So you can do all kinds of stuff. I mean, juicing, cooking, sauces, pies, ciders. Just make sure you kind of are picking towards that. And then we'll jump over to microclimate. So this is kind of a little more getting into the nitty gritty. So your microclimate compared to the macroclimate is your own unique environment that you're growing in. So you want to look at your soil composition. There's this great little triangle here that's often used in this case. And you can literally just go out to your garden or your site, dig a big hole, well, not big, dig a hole, get some soil, enough that you've got about a cup of soil, put it in a glass that's clear with water, and let it settle out. And it'll settle in layers, and you can kind of get a sense of what your soil is like. So knowing what kind of soil you have is helpful, because then you can make sure you're planting something that's going to work in that soil. For example, if you have heavy clay, you're not going to want to plant a peach tree in that, because you're going to set yourself up for failure. Stone fruits tend to like really well draining soil. So that's kind of one of the factors. You want to make sure you've got soil that will work for whatever kind of tree you want to plant. Soil fertility, organic matter. So that's part of what makes up soil, is the organic matter content. And you want to make sure that you've got a reasonably fertile soil, so that you've got generally, a general rule of thumb, all fruit trees need pretty high soil fertility and organic content in the soil to have good quality fruit down the road, but also to have a healthy tree. I always recommend doing a soil test. They cost $10 to $20. They're pretty cheap. They're easy enough to do. We've got some information on that, like on our website. We have one of our soil tests posted, and some information about that. And they're really helpful in finding out what's going on and what will grow for you. If you don't want to do a soil test, you can also just kind of look at what's already growing there. If you're planting into an old pasture field or hay field or something like that, you're going to have good soil fertility. If you're planting into a subdivision that was recently developed and it's just been backfilled, you're probably going to have pretty poor soil fertility. And yeah, you'll just kind of get a sense that way as well. If you're planting into barren, desertified soil, you're going to struggle. Drainage, moving on to that. Basically anywhere that has water sitting for 2 weeks or longer is going to be not so great for fruit trees. Specifically, the stone fruits, again, they really like good drainage. Not sure, dig a hole and dump some water in, and just observe how long it takes for the water to drain down. Sun, pretty much all fruit trees, and the majority of berries, currants being one of the main differences that way, but generally everything requires full sun. So that means 8 hours a day during the growing season. And then shelter. So there's different ways of looking at shelter. Sometimes it's good. Sometimes it's bad because it reduces your sunlight, and if it's in a small city plot. But generally sheltering around fruit trees isn't a bad thing, because it will help with wind and such, to just make it be a little bit easier on the tree as it's bearing heavy crop loads and stuff like that. One thing to note, if you have a property that has a grade and the soil, the land slopes down, always consider that frost settles in the valleys. So if you're planting a peach and your property slopes, I would recommend planting in the middle to high ground, just so that way it tends, the frost tends to settle in the valleys, and you hopefully will miss, often with stone fruits, because they bloom later or earlier in spring, they'll tend to get frosted off depending where you plant them, the blossoms, and so then that can really reduce your yield in terms of crops. So if you can kind of situate your tree in a spot that isn't as susceptible to frost, that naturally is in higher ground, then you're just, again, setting yourself up for success down the road. There's a link on our not Facebook, on our website here, that talks more about this kind of stuff here. So I won't bother going into that details. You can definitely look that up and read about it there. Hardiness zones, that's another big factor. They are
try to connect on Bluetooth. What? Go to Bluetooth and connect that way.
Is everything okay?
Yep, sorry about that, Steph. Go ahead.
Okay, so for hardiness zones, you definitely, it's good to know what zone you're in. So you can do this. This is just the Government of Canada's page, and you can look up where you are very easily with this map once it loads, and it tells you what different zones there are and what you would be in. I do find, though, your own microclimate within that makes a difference. If you're planting a tree out in the middle of an open field where it gets all the wind and all the elements, it's going to have to be hardier than a tree that's tucked in closer to a house and it's sheltered. So definitely look at your hardiness zone, but don't necessarily let that be the ultimate defining. Well, do follow that, but feel free to experiment, I guess is what I should leave it as. Okay, so that is that, and then we move on to the next screen here. So this is just showing, trying to get an idea of how you can look at the land. This is these orchards. This is the orchard that's at the nursery. You can see in the corner there, that's the barn, and this is a row of cedars. The north up here, east, of course, over here, and that's where the fields are. To the south is the bottom of the screen, and that's where the road is. So this orchard, it's nice and sheltered to the west, but it's totally open to the northeast, and then the south has the road, and it's got a tree line there as well. You can't see it in here, but you just want to have a sense of how the layout of the land works a little bit. It also, you can't really see it very well in this picture, but this land does slope a little bit. It's a bit lower in the bottom and higher in the top, and we found digging a hole, the soil does change. The top is a bit heavier, has more clay in it. The bottom, as you go down, it's lighter, sandier loam, and therefore it's a little more well suited to the cherries and tender fruits, whereas up top we focus mostly on the apples. That said, this orchard is the smorgasbord, and there's everything everywhere basically, so it's interesting to try playing around and seeing different things. So this is the same orchard, approximately the same view. Those are those trees off to the side. The barn is hidden from view here. You can see a piece of the field over here. So just to give you kind of, when you're planting something, think to the future as best as you can. Easier said than done sometimes, for sure. But it's kind of cool to see all the change. And you can see that spinguoli that's blooming in there. It's an Asian pear tree. It's nice, good fun one. Okay, so the next one, space. That's always a big constraint. So on the right here, you can see, I won't bother reading them out, but you can see all the different sort of, these will be approximate tree heights. So the general rule of thumb is you want to space the trees out about as tall as they'll get wide. That's completely broken if you're going to trellis your tree or espalier them. That's basically on this picture over here. It's showing you've got your posts and wires, and it's a guide for the trees, and they basically become sort of more 2D. Well, espalier is more 2D for sure. Whereas the trellis, like a high density trellis situation like this, is here. Of course, these are dwarf trees, and they're spaced a lot tighter. Like there's some dwarf orchards that are like about a foot apart or to 16 inches. Like they're very tightly packed in there. So there's lots of ways to space out your trees, and you can, if you're determined you want to grow apples and you have a very small backyard that's 10 feet by 20 feet, like you can do it. You just have to find ways to work with what you've got. So also this link here, we'll click on that. And this goes to, this page is in our catalog, and I just copied and pasted it on the website here. So it's got the page numbers down there. But this is a helpful chart. It's got, you know, your different adaptability to different soil types, average years to bearing, tolerance to shade, tolerance to wet, and approximate, I believe it's height. It's in that column, or spreading, I think spacing. Actually, I think there's spacing. Yeah, spacing specifications. So that's a good, useful resource to kind of help out with the do you have enough space section. But again, you can make other options work. You just have to have a little be a little creative about it. All right, and we'll jump into pollination because that sort of ties in with spacing. If you want more detailed pollination explanation, you can click on that link. But generally speaking, you want to plant 2 to 3 of a kind of species, a species being apple or Malus domestica, in different varieties, being Honeycrisp, for example, or Gala or whatnot. 3 is ideal in case one dies, you still have that other pollination partner. There's a few apple varieties that are triploids, meaning they would need those 3. But the majority of apples and all of pears are diploids, so they just need 2 other pollination partners. So yeah, that kind of goes over that. Typically, apples pollinate apples, pears pollinate pears. So if you wanted to have a Bartlett pear and a Honeycrisp apple, they would not cross pollinate. So that's, yeah, you just want to make sure you're getting stuff you're going to get fruit from again there. Let's see, peaches, sour cherries, and all the apricot varieties that we grow, but not all apricot varieties, just the varieties that we grow are all self-fertile. So if you're getting from another nursery, just have that in mind. Apricots, you still need to check. Sweet cherries and plums are finicky. Just look them up, do a little bit more research before you plant them. There are some that are self-pollinating of both of those, but many of them are not self-pollinating and they have weird rules around pollination rules. So always just kind of check in that before you go ahead with it. And then berries are a mixed bag. Many of them are self-pollinating. There's some that require a pollinator. Some of them, like sea buckthorn, they require like 1 male plant for every 5 female plants. So they're kind of go all over the place. But that's very briefly pollination. So jumping on orchard management, this is something everybody has to decide themselves. So you can ask yourselves these questions. How many times a year do you want to spray your trees? Do you tolerate blemishes? Would an apple ruin your day if you chomped into your apple? Or sorry, would a worm ruin your day if you chomped into your apple and found one there? Do you want to spend a lot of money on sprays and stuff like that? Like what's your preference that way? Do you want to prune annually, which I do recommend? Do you want to do conventional or organic? Lots of different options. There's no one right way. It's how you want to do it. And you can make different situations work. You know, maybe you don't want to spray so much, but at least you do the pruning. Different things. There's lots of ways to grow fruit trees. It just kind of depends on what your preference is. This page here just goes to our, if you go to our resources and FAQ here, you can follow through the links. And this kind of this is a big long PDF that kind of goes through the different things we've encountered and what we do for them at our nursery and in our orchards. This is our holistic spray recipe, which is what we use. And that's basically all we use. We don't really spray for anything else unless there's a severe outbreak of something, which so far we've been really lucky with. And this holistic spray recipe seems to really be quite effective in managing just the general overall orchard. And it's the nice thing with a holistic spray is that it works for virtually anything you're spraying, whether it's berries or nut trees or fruit trees, or I mean, you could even spray your garden crops. The one thing I would say is because there's the liquid fish in there, you wouldn't really want to spray that on before you eat your lettuce or stuff like that. So not saying you should always just use that on everything, but it's a very neutral recipe that's just generally boosting plants' immune systems. So that goes back to this final point here. Always have a realistic expectation of what you want from your trees. And if you're gonna ignore your tree and not really do anything, often your harvest will reflect that. And vice versa, if you care for it, give it a little bit of love, prune it and help it along the way a little bit, you'll see that. There are definitely some more naturally disease-resistant varieties and old heritage varieties that go a long way to reducing what you really need to do to get good quality fruit. But that's just one thing to keep in mind, is having an idea of what you want to be doing for your tree. So now we'll jump into rootstock quick here. So this picture down here is what it's before we put sawdust in cold storage in the fall. Everything is just sort of sitting out here with the roots out. So you can see the graft unions. If you follow my mouse, I'm kind of outlining roughly where they are. Sometimes it's easier to tell on different trees, but the rootstock, it's basically use that because it controls the vigor of the tree, which also leads to the disease resistance, yield, years to bearing, and the hardiness. So there's many different rootstocks and they're used for many different things, but basically you can narrow them down to dwarf, semi-dwarf, and full size, which is displayed in here. So generally speaking, the dwarf trees, that's something you can pick by hand from standing. It gets 8 to 10 feet tall, so it's about 2 meters. It'll come into production earlier, but it also dies a lot earlier. And it always needs to be staked or else it can tip right over with heavy harvest or crop load, sorry. Then there's semi-dwarf, which is kind of your middle size, about 4 meters or 12 to 15 feet tall. You'd want to harvest it with either like a stick with like those little apple picker attachments or a ladder. It does need to be staked the first couple of years, or it's recommended to, you don't have to necessarily. And it does bear fruit a little bit later, so more so around the 3 to 5 year mark, but it lasts a lot longer. You're gonna have a tree for much longer time. And then full size is kind of, you definitely would need a ladder with that one. It's gonna take many years to come into production, like 10, sometimes more years before you start getting fruit production, but it's also gonna live for a long, long time. So those are kind of the different stages there. So in terms of the other types of fruit, with us, every nursery does things differently. What we do with them, generally speaking, is we just graft them onto full-size rootstock. It's tried and true, it's nice and hardy, the ones that we use, and it works for us. We have started to do with pears, the dwarf, semi-dwarf, full-size, and are experimenting with that a little bit now that there's some more options out there that are a little more attainable, but generally speaking, the stone fruits are all on full size for what we do. And the little bit at the bottom there, so rootstock, it reduces the vigor of the cultivar that's on top. And it's often expressed as a percentage of standard or full size, which would that be 100%. So dwarfs are then 30 to 45 or 40%, and semi-dwarfs are 50 to 80%. In this previous slide, we just do it by the size of the tree. But often other places will have percentages. Doesn't really matter how you say it. How patient are you? So this goes into years. How many years will your fruit tree take before it begins bearing? Again, everything is all kind of interconnected on this more the more production sort of thoughts of how you choose a fruit tree. So the years to bearing is greatly affected by the rootstock. The precocity of a tree, that's the top part of the tree, would have different cultivars, which is cultivar is a cultivated variety. They'll have different levels of precocity, which if you go on our website, you can search by precocity. And that's just another factor that dictates how soon a fruit tree will bear fruit. And then your growing conditions, how well you take care of it, also affects that. In conclusion, plant something that excites you, plant something that requires the level of maintenance that you want to give it, and plant something that works with your natural microclimate. It's a lot more expensive to try and fix your microclimate to work for a fruit tree. It's just an uphill battle. And one last little final sentiment. After planting my fair share of trees, my best advice is to plant with purpose, water well the first year, use a spiral guard in the winter, and enjoy the magic of growing your own food, because it's pretty crazy to be able to do that. And I know I went through everything pretty quick. Is there any questions, comments, or concerns?
Yeah, Steph, thanks so much. There is a few questions in the chat room. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen really quickly as well.
Oh, should I stop sharing my screen?
That's already done, Steph. Yeah, so there's a few questions in the chat. Thanks so much for that. I'm just going to pull those up now. So the first is Vanessa asked, I have a nectarine tree for about 10 years, only had one fruit. Not far from it is a peach that does fairly well. I guess the question is there, how can I get more fruit from my tree? And can you talk about how to naturally avoid the leaf curling and any getting black?
So I'm guessing pollination might be the issue with a nectarine. I'm not as familiar with nectarines specifically. We don't tend to grow them just because we have troubles with, so anything that we grow in our test orchard, then we tend to propagate from that. And we haven't been able to successfully grow and get fruit from nectarines just because they seem to not be quite hardy enough, or we're not choosing the right varieties. So I'm not as well versed in nectarines. But if you've had it for 10 years, they're very similar to peaches in their species. Then they behave very similarly, is my understanding. So I would think it's a pollination issue. If you've got that peach there, I would have thought that would have pollinated it, but I might be wrong. If it seems healthy otherwise, though, I would again go back. I would research that specific. If you know the variety that you have, I would just do some research on that and see what its pollination requirements are, especially if it blooms really well and you have no fruit. The other thing would be if your peach tree also doesn't give you much fruit and you notice in spring that it frosts when it's blooming, that's going to make your frost tank. And you're going to have hardly anything, which is what we have problems with our apricots. They bloom and they look beautiful and amazing, and then we get no fruit. So probably I would guess either frost or pollination. As to the peach leaf curl, I'm assuming that's what you mean when the peach leaves, they curl up and they get kind of like reddish. That is, you can use, I think it's copper. It's an organic, but it's a fungicide. We don't use it. We've stopped using it. I know Ken, the previous owner, he did use it a few times, but then decided to just do the holistic spray, and that's all we do. And it works. It works quite well. We do get the peach leaf curl still, but it tends, the tree gets it, the leaves drop off, the fruit still forms, and we tend to have good crops of peaches regardless. It just seems that the trees go through that cycle of getting it, and then they get over it, and away they go. But yeah, I would say if you want to completely not get it, probably spraying, I believe it's the copper sulfur. It'll be in that just tree disease PDF. I think we go over that in that. That would be what I would suggest for that.
Yeah, great. And I will follow up in an email with some resources that Steph mentioned today. So the next few questions are about Silver Creek. Do you carry any species that you have grown from seed, any native trees or berries? And do you carry any columnar fruit trees?
Columnar, we just started maple, not maple like the tree, MAY space POLE, which is an apple. We're trying that out a little bit. That's as far. I think we had a few for sale this year. Often when I get new varieties in, I'll graft 10, keep some for myself for our test orchard, and the rest will sell as sort of like one-offs. So we do have some of those one-offs, but I haven't tasted any of the fruit from them myself, or know much about them other than that they're columnar. What was the other part of that question? The first part.
If you carried any
seedlings.
Yeah, do you grow any from seed?
Yeah, so we do a bit now. Yeah, that's one thing we kind of started more in the last couple of years. My dad actually is taking care of that part of it. So yeah, we've saved seeds from our orchard and other local nurseries, or not nurseries, but other local orchards. We'll plant out the seeds and grow seedling stock. So we do have seedling peaches, and we have other seedlings as well of the fruit trees, but they've mostly sold out. So the reason why you don't often plant fruit trees from seed is because you're going to get a mixed bag of what your tree's going to actually end up. Apples and pears is the worst. Like, you have the most genetic diversity, so you might plant a seed from a gala apple, but it is not necessarily going to be remotely like Gala. In fact, it's a pretty low percentage that it will be. Whereas the stone fruits tend to be a lot more treated type. Not all of them, but like apricots and peaches, especially, they tend to be, if you're having a seed that's a nice eating, you're often going to get a nice eating tree from that, and it's a lot cheaper. So we have started to do that more, and just the biodiversity of it, which is awesome. So yeah, we do that some for sure.
Awesome. And then the next question is about deers. How do you keep them from young trees? And are there any fruit trees that deers don't like?
That's tricky. There are different fences you can try and use. There's a string fence. I can't remember what exactly it's called, but it's sort of, you can just have like a full out like snow fence type fence. But often deer jump really high. So I know there's some orchards that have been doing, it sort of makes an optical illusion, and the deer can't gauge, their perception is off with the way the angles of the springs are at. And so that's kind of a more neutral or less intense fence. But deer often, if you've got a really high population of deer, pretty much every single type of fruit tree, in my experience anyways, is fair game to them. And just a big, like a solid, well-built fence is your best defense. Otherwise, if it's just rabbits, moles, bulls, mice, stuff like that, a spiral guard is perfect, and that's pretty much all you need.
Amazing. Thanks so much for answering those questions, Steph, and for your amazing presentation today. Before you go, I have up here if you want to grow your own food. So not only will I provide the resources for Steph's and Silver Creek Nursery, how to access those resources, I have pulled up here Treemobile. Treemobile has rolled back into town for the 12th year of delivering a great selection of affordable fruit trees and food-bearing plants to home growers. This volunteer not-for-profit group stocks everything from apple trees to asparagus, and back this year, a high-rise package for balcony gardeners. So there's also opportunities for Treemobile awards for community gardeners, and that resource will be provided in the follow-up email. Thank you all for tuning in today. Unfortunately, that is all the time that we have for questions, but there is a lot more great questions that came in at the end, and I will compile those to you, Steph, and if you have some time to respond to those, that would be great.
For sure. Yep.
If you are, sorry, I just do want to address the one question that just came in, that you're having difficulty getting into the meetings, no Zoom links. Zoom links are being sent 10 minutes before the scheduled time. So look out for that. And if you have any difficulties accessing that, contact Garden at Green Venture and I can get you that Zoom link. That's all for now. Our next presentation is at 1 p.m. integrating nature into our suburban landscape. So thank you all for tuning in today to Steph's talk. Thank you so much, Steph.
No problem. My pleasure.
Goodbye.